So I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me to share these reflections about my dear city, Barcelona. I'm currently based in London, but I'm originally from Barcelona. And in this presentation, I have been very lucky to count with my sister's pictures and pictures from the social media to illustrate a little bit what is going on there and make some reflections on them. As you see, I wonder if these are safe streets for whom and for how long are they going to be safe if they are. So to start with, just the contents, I'm going to give you a bit of very quick background about the city of Barcelona. I think many of you might have known that city in the past, might be traveling there maybe in the past, so I'm not going to say a lot about it. Then I'm going to move on to the City Council response measures. I'm going to comment a little bit on them. I'm going to be a bit critical as well. I'm going to make a potential analysis of inequalities with the limited data that we have. And I'm going to also show some initiatives from the social movements that have been going on that I think it's very interesting to also take into account. So just to start with the background, Barcelona is a city that has 1.5 million of inhabitants, together with the metropolitan area that would do 3 million, and the population density is very high for a European city. As you can see, the Mediterranean cities sometimes go quite high in terms of population density. That's the case of Barcelona, with a density higher than Shanghai, Jakarta, or Taipei, for example. It's also a city, I don't know if you can see my cursor, my mouse is here. So it's a city that is surrounded by two rivers, one in the south, one in the north, a mountain area, this is a natural park as well, and the sea. So that is one of the reasons why it's so very dense. It has to grow in this limited territory. Another thing that might be interesting for some of you is to bear in mind the modal split of the city. Almost a third of the trips are walking. This is really important. Cycling is only 2%, but it's pretty visible because the land, the territory, as I was saying, is quite small. The density is high, but the territory is quite small. 9 kilometers of diameter has this city. And then there's public transport. The trips in public transport are 40%. And then there is car mobility, mainly on a 26%. And this is both, movements that are starting or ending in the city. But if we looked only to those movements within the city, so starting and finishing within the red area here, the limited with the red line, it would be 50% walking. And that's quite impressive, as you might imagine as well. So that's for you to have an idea how Barcelona looks like in terms of mobility. And then let's move on right away to the city council measures. The city council has started doing some weekend closures of some very important streets, very wide streets, very busy streets as well. And this is similar to ciclovías. The only difference probably is that there are not many activities, organized activities going on. It's just closed and then people can take the streets. So I would just like to show you how that looks like. This is one of these streets. This is from my sister's balcony. And as you see, there's also some of the measures for the bicycle that I will discuss later in yellow. This is a combined cycle and bus lane, and that goes through that street the rest of the weekdays. Other measures comprehend traffic calming measures, service road closures, sidewalk widenings, bus lanes as well, and pop-up cycle, what they call corridors. I'm a bit critical with the name of corridor because, as you will see, this is an umbrella term for various kinds of measures that cannot really be called cycle lanes. So this is a variety of measures that the City Council has implemented, and I would like to highlight that they take place in a limited area of the city center, one of the busiest and more commercial areas as well. So for you to have a walk in Barcelona, you don't need to wear any masks this time. but you will see these widenings of of the sidewalks. They're actually non-protected. It's just this painter that is in the street. They have chosen the yellow painter because it's the provisional idea, the painter that is used generally in works, and also the painter that was used in the in what we call, and you might have heard about it as well, the super blocks, the super blocks model in Barcelona. So they have used the same design to create this kind of imagery or readability in people's mind. The traffic calming measures are exactly the same as before, but they put a bit of elements in the street, some benches, and they move some elements of the street to create a little bit more protection from the car traffic. And then the service road closures. So these are very big lanes in which there are service roads, and these are closed for the use of pedestrians and cyclists. But as you see, they put these fences here, and so cyclists cannot have an itinerary here. They cannot have a continuous cycle lane. They have to mix with pedestrians, which is not ideal. So some of these measures are being refined at the moment because they are not so operative, so ideal in that sense. We have to think also about the reality of these sidewalks in Barcelona. They are not so big and they're cramped, and the motorbike parking is one of the issues. But as you see here, there are works in the buildings, and there are also the alfresco terraces from the restaurants that are creating a lot of occupation in the space, especially because now they're only allowed to use this alfresco space to do their services for restaurants and bars. Some of the things I'd like to highlight here is that, for example, tourism-related areas, they have been relieved from a lot of pressure. As you see, this is a before with very touristic area near the cathedral, and this is children now using that area to play. So this is part of the question at the beginning: how long is this going to last for, and for whom are these measures, right? So also in this line, people disabled, they have started voicing that they are in perpetual lockdown because of the lack of accessibility. This is also a campaign that some of the disabled people initiatives and campaigners are running at the moment to highlight those limitations. And then moving on to the cycle corridors, as I was saying, I'm critical of this term because some of them, they're just shared bicycle lanes, as you can see, and there's a lot of traffic. The lanes are not very wide, and they have to go along with these buses in the same spaces. You can also see a lot of e-scooters. This was already quite high before the crisis hit in Barcelona. This is how these corridors look like, as you can see. And there are also pop-up cycle lanes. So notice that the cycle lanes have no protection at all, or they're only painted all along. Yeah, so these are things to note. And the new normality, drags the same old problems. There are this vehicle here blocking this pop-up bicycle lane because they are loading and unloading for the nearby commercial areas and so on. So we still have the same issues related to the lack of enforcement, for example. And I also wanted to show you how things look like in terms of the use of infrastructure. This is the comparison between, in yellow, the bicycle infrastructure, existing bicycle infrastructure that has counters on them, and the rest are different ways to access the city via roads. So this is used by car. The only use by bicycles is the yellow one, and it's the one that has increased the most. There has also been an increase in bicycle sales, and repair services for bicycles have multiplied by 3. So people are taking the bicycles out of their balconies. They're dusting them off to be able to use them as soon as possible. Also, a quick word about bike sharing. It has increased the number of stations and their services. They ask the users to implement the hygienic measures. And during the lockdown, there has also been a very interesting regulation put in place that was already planned before lockdown about the shared micromobility services. The city has been very rigid regulating these. And I find something quite critical, and that is that these services, these shared privately owned bicycle shared services, they have to use the bicycle parking, the public bicycle parking. So they're occupying this bicycle parking, and parking is something that bicycle parking is something that is not really contemplated in the measures, in the lockdown measures. So I leave it hanging there, but for me it's really important. Parking is part of the trip, of the cycle trip, and it is not contemplated in the measures. So very quickly, potential inequalities. This is a comparison between a couple of studies that I would like to make. This was done very recently for some colleagues in the Autonomous University in Barcelona, and they were picturing during the lockdown the mobility that has been going on. Where is it located? And they have crossed that with the available household income. So where more mobility has been detected, it coincides with the lowest income ranges as well. And we have to be very aware that these essential workers that have been traveling during lockdown, there is mobility of care, and you know, they were nurses, medics, and people who would be in the shops, in the food shops, or, you know, essential workers, and they've all have been underprivileged. They have been unprivileged by this sort of mobility inequality. If we wanted to look at it in terms of what happened with the cycle infrastructure and who can access it and who can ride safely during lockdown and after lockdown, well, we have been doing some studies in Barcelona that are currently under review, and I just wanted to show you, we created an index of inequality. The lowest categories of the index, so the poorer people, have the lowest access to both cycle network and bike sharing stations. So these essential workers, probably they're the ones that have the least access to bicycle infrastructure and services. If we take it to metropolitan area, just very quickly, these inequalities also appear here in the fringes of Barcelona with the rest of municipalities. There are a lot of blue dots here, which means there are people who live in vulnerable areas who have to move. And if we look at metropolitan cycle mobility, it has increased incredibly. So this is something that is very impressive as well. Normally, we only look at the citywide mobility, but the metropolitan cycle mobility has increased, and this is something we need to also bear in mind when we manage this mobility, because people in lower income ranges and vulnerable people might live just outside the city, and they need to enter the city in active mobility way, in the most secure way, in the most safe way. Very quickly as well, social movements. I think it's very interesting. Just a couple of minutes. I know we are already with 12. Sorry about that. But just 1 minute to tell you about a lockdown bicycle demonstration that took place. It was programmed, it was forecasted before the lockdown, and they still did it on Jitsi, which is something similar to Zoom, and people took selfies, and they were just complaining about a major refurbishment in one of the major streets that was not taking the bicycle into account. And then there has been manifestos there are a lot of hyperlinks in my presentation if you want to take a look closer. But just to tell you, there has been a feminist perspective mobility of care manifest of active mobility that I count myself in as one of the promoters of it. So this one is very close to my heart. There is also a wider one about just recovering the city, lock down the cars, you know, just confine the cars and we will recover the city. This is another beautiful manifesto. And then as just an example of radical change towards greener economy, in terms of cyclologistic, which is also a very interesting area, these girls, for example, these ladies, they used to be tour guides, touristic tour guides. And because of the COVID-19 crisis, they reinvent themselves as cyclologistic, as cycle couriers, and they offer now their services. So this is just an example of how things can be switched to a different perspective in these times. And that's it. I'd like to thank you. Sorry for surpassing my time, but here is my contact details if you need them. So feel free, please, to contact me with any questions, and we discuss also at the end. Thank you.